Olá pessoal, bom dia. Eu vou começar falando em português para vocês e depois eu passo em inglês e passo a palavra para o professor Callum Ross, tudo bem? Então, primeiramente, eu gostaria de agradecer a todos por comparecerem aqui nessa primeira conferência latino-americana de biomecânica crâniofacial. Eu, em primeira mão, gostaria de agradecer à Unicamp, à Universidade de Chicago, especialmente ao professor Callum Ross, aos professores Cláudia, professor Alexandre, aos alunos que trabalharam nisso, a diretoria da Faculdade de Odontologia de Piracicaba, que deu suporte, que deu transporte, forneceu a estrutura para a gente realizar esse congresso, e especialmente ao pessoal da informática, dizer que essa é a primeira conferência aqui com esse pessoal. Nós temos um pessoal da Universidade de Chicago, temos um pessoal da Universidade de Illinois de Chicago, pessoal da Universidade de São Francisco, e nós vamos falar um pouquinho para vocês sobre biomecânica crâniofacial durante esses, na verdade é um dia e meio, bem? Então, ao final do evento, eu farei um longo agradecimento a todos para não atrasar o início desse evento. E agora eu vou falar um pouquinho em inglês para passar a palavra para o professor Callum, tudo bem? So I would like to thank you for Callum to come here and bring all the other guys from the U.S. Thank you, Callum, for coming. Callum is a friend from the University of Chicago, and he will talk a little bit about why is this conference, what is this conference, and about the guys. Okay? Thank you very much, Callum.
Thank you. Thank you, Felippe. So it's great to be here. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to all people who are watching online. Craniofacial biomechanics is, well, the reason you're here is you all know how important craniofacial biomechanics is. It's important for understanding human health, conservation, and so we have a wide range of speakers talking about finite element modeling of jaws. We have Andrea Taylor's going to talk about muscle, and we have some people going to talk about craniofacial biomechanics in monkeys in the wild. So that's for today and tomorrow. I want to thank Unicamp for hosting the Congress, for funding, contributing some funding for the Congress. The University of Chicago contributed funding as well. Felippe, thank you for hosting us. It's always great to come to Brazil. Cláudia and Alexandre have done a great job organizing, and the students who have helped them. So thank you very much. And so, without any further ado, thank you.
Ok, thank you, Callum. Ana, você quer falar alguma coisa? Tudo bem? Now I would like to invite Professor José Iriartes from the University of Illinois of Chicago to give the talk. Okay, thank you, Pep, for coming.
Okay. Bom dia. My name is José Iriarte Díaz. Like, people know me as Pepe, and I don't know if you can notice by my accent that I am not an English speaking originally. I'm originally from Chile, and I moved to the U.S. to do like my PhD many years ago. So I've been working in there in the craniofacial system and trying to understand the diversity of the primate feeding system from a biomechanical perspective through work which is a big experimental, but also in the last couple of years I've been trying to understand this from a modeling perspective. How can we create 3D models that can create new hypotheses that we can test? So if you have any questions, you can just raise your hands, let me know. If you don't understand something, just let me know. And because because I speak Spanish, I can understand Portuguese a little bit. So if you ask me in Portuguese, I might be able to respond. Definitely not in Portuguese, but I'll do my best. All right. So the title of the talk is slightly different from the ones you have in the program. It's using virtual models to explore the diversity of the primate feeding system. And first, I want to give thanks for like the organizing committee here, Unicamp, for Felippe and Cláudia, Alexandre, for the environment, for Callum also to invite, and for my school, UIC, for allowing me to skip a couple of days of teaching and be able to be here. So it's a great honor to be here for the first, hopefully first of many conference. So there is big diversity in primates in the craniofacial system. There is huge diversity in size. There is huge diversity in their morphology. So you have, for example, like very tiny guys. There you can have like gorillas on one side. You can see like there is variation. In human, there is variations in like the overall size. You can see the variations in how, for example, like the mandibles are. Like very elongated mandibles, like in mandrills, much shorter, like you have the ones you have in humans. You have like big fosses for massive muscles, and those diversities in the shape is going to importantly affect the biomechanics of the feeding system. So one of the things that I've been trying to do during the last couple of years, trying to understand how this diversity in morphology affects like biomechanical performance in the field system. So it's like a very classic approach of how forms can affect the function of the system. And this morphological diversity also is reflected in behavioral diversity, where you have animals that eat multiple elements. You can have guys that eat, for example, leaves or fruits. You get like very specialized animals, for example, like they're going to gnaw on bark. Animals that can eat like very tough foods. But also you see that they use their craniofacial system in different ways. Some of them are going to bite with their incisors, while other animals, they'll try to move the food back into their mouth to create like different biomechanical regimes. So the diversity of the morphology also is affected by how the animals modulate their behavior to create this performance. Just have an idea of how much time I'm using here. So one of the big questions underneath is, of all of these characteristics, which are the most important determinants of bite performance, like from a morphological and physiological perspective in primates? So, because we're talking about bite performance, bite force, a lot is related how much force can we produce into the system. So, in the most simple sense, we can say that bite force depends on like the muscle size, how big your muscles are, or where you place them. So this is kind of like a diagram from Highlander it was a couple of years ago in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology, where it's like different ways that you can actually modulate by performance. And here you can see like there are many ways to do it. For example, like you can increase bite for itself by, for example, like increasing the muscle size, just making the muscle bigger, increasing the cross-sectional area, and that's going to create just much more force applying to the system. You can also, for example, like modulate muscle fibers, and here we're going to be talking about some of trade-off into the system where we can increase muscle force by, for example, like increasing the total size of the muscle, not changing the organization of the muscle itself, or we can change the organization of the muscle that's going to change the some perspectives of the size. So when talking about muscle force, we can in terms of like overall size, we can change the muscle architecture related mostly related to pennation angles. But also we can modify where the muscle is located. So if you have like a hinge joint right here, if we have like a muscle apply a force in here, if we can move that muscle kind of like farther away from the joint, we can increase the moment arm apply on the system. So there are multiple ways to solve this problem of increasing by force. So one way we can do this is we can take, for example, like a 3D model of a monkey in this case. This is a macaque, and we can map the position of the muscle. Here you can see like these black lines. You can see like the orientation like of the masseter or the temporalis and the medial pterygoid. So we know more or less where these muscles are located into this three-dimensional model, and because from that we can have an idea of like the direction of the muscle, like the direction of the force applied on the system, and if, for example, give an idea of like the cross-sectional area, also we can have an educated guess of how much force can we produce. So we know where it's produced and how much force can we generate. But this is just for one animal. So the best idea will, the best approach will be to be able to, for example, like go and measure, like the diversity of the primate of the primate clade, see how all of these different species vary in terms of their muscle size and muscle configurations. But it's really hard. It's hard to access to this material. So one of the things we can do is to use material which is readily available for use. And this is something that has changed in the last couple of years, where nowadays there is huge amount of material readily available online for use. There is a new explosion of online repositories that here, for example, you can see like Morphosource. I think digital morphology, like Digimorph, it was one of the first sites where people doing some kind of experiment were scanning, creating 3D models, and making this available for use for other researchers. For our case, in particular, there is an amazing resource, which is like Digital Morphology Museum from Japan, where they have like a huge collections of primates that have been scanned, and they're available for download. So you can take these 3D models, so we can create a huge diversity of, take a sample of the diversity of the primate system, and trying to ask some questions about how the variations in the morphology can affect performance. So the approach that I've been using is to take these 3D models, so you can create a virtual shell, for example, like the cranium and the mandible. And for example, like for this talk, I'm being able to collect data from 76 species of these primates, when you have from prosimians, New World monkeys, and Old World monkeys. So there is a variation, like we have models for all of these individuals. So we can have the cranium and the mandible, and we can see that the muscles leave traces that we can map. So for example, like in this case, we have the temporalis right here. So we know it's going to be the attachment on the cranium of the temporalis. We can know the attachment of the temporalis on the coronoid process. And if we know the attachment, we can have an idea of where the muscle fibers are going to be. So we can do something like this. So we can map virtual muscles. We have from the attachment point on the cranium to the mandible. So we know that, for example, like for each of these fibers, we know like the direction of the muscle force is going to be applied. And also because we know where they begin and where they ends, we can actually measure, for example, like the total muscle length. And we can do this for all of these individuals. So now we're going to have a rich source of morphological variations that we can ask some questions about the biomechanical performance of the system. So in this case, we can, for example, like we can measure muscle length, the direction of the muscle force, and also if we know that the joints, the forces are going to be applying around the jaw joints, we can, for example, we can estimate the muscle moments of the system. So, for example, one kind of approach that we can use is we can see, for example, the ability of the muscles to produce a certain force. In this case, we're talking about the pitching moment, like the rotations around the jaw joint around that axis, for the temporalis, for the masseter, and for the medial pterygoid. So this is kind of like the results that you can see where we are mapping the moment arm, the ability to create this force over the phylogeny. And here you can see like this is the same phylogeny that we use in this case where prosimians are going to be in blue, New World monkeys are going to be in red, and Old World monkeys are going to be in green, and then Old World monkeys are going to be in red. So you can see the same colors here, prosimians, New World monkeys, and Old World monkeys. And it's going to be color-coded. When you have blue, it's going to be very low levels of moment. So you have like very poor like biting ability. And if you have like red colors, means that you are much better at to produce biting forces. And the first thing you can see is that different muscles have different levels. So for example, here also where we can differentiate an anterior segments, like the segments going on the anterior part of the temporalis, posterior segments, or some muscle fibers in the middle. So you see there is variation between like this and this segment, but also there is variation between muscles. The masseter in here you can see have much higher biting moments that you will find in the temporalis. And this also you can see that, and this effect is going to be concentrated mostly in these New World monkeys species. So for some features of the morphology, these New World monkeys, their masseter is going to be one of the most efficient muscles and producing like these biting forces. You also could see the same here if we just take the endpoints and we average. You see like the mean values of, for example, for the masseter, for the pterygoids, for the temporalis, in terms of the moment arm for the anterior, middle, and posterior segments. Here you can see that the masseter is going to be much higher than you'll see for the medial pterygoid and the temporalis. And specifically for that, for these New World monkeys from 4 platyrhines. So there is variation between these groups. So this is one of the kind of questions that we can start asking just by looking at these models. So then we can start asking ourselves, like, so why for example, like these New World monkeys are special? Why is, like, in terms of their morphology different from these other species? But this is completely like static. You see, like this is like the biting moment when the mandibles are just basically in occlusion. But you know that the mandibles also they move, and their behavior in the move, like the biomechanics of the muscles, when the mandible is closed or when the mandible is open, is going to be pretty different. So mandibles are going to be, I think you're going to be using the same slide. Huh? I think like I stole it from you, but I'm just So we know also, like, so in this case, you see like the mandibles can be used in different ways, and there is a very important trade-off that Andrew Taylor is going to be talking later today, where there is a sweet spot on the extension of the muscles. Like, muscles are going to extend, they're going to contract, and there is one central point where they can produce maximal force. And if you extend it beyond that point, the amount of force that can be generated is going to decrease. And if you contract them also beyond that point, it also is going to drastically reduce their force. So ideally, animals, you want to work in that a sweet spot where performance is maximal. But what is nice about these virtual models is that we can modulate, we can create movement in the system. So for example, this is data from, this is data, and we can recreate movement either measuring experimentally, go measure the exact movement that these animals use, or we can actually just model the movement. And we can estimate the muscle mechanics, muscle dynamics. And here you can see that, let me see if I can play this again. Well, it's not moving anymore, but you can see like this muscle, they change the position, they change their length, moving away from this, one more. So they can move their muscles, so they're moving along this line of the curve. So they extend their muscles, they go back. But also, the position and the direction of the muscle is going to be changing. So it's a dynamic process that we can actually measure easily with these models. So one of the things that can happen is, for example, we can test what is the effect of opening your mandible in terms of like the amount of stretching of this muscle. And we know if you stretch it too much, it's going to be bad for the muscle because it cannot produce enough force. So for example, we have this case for one animal. We can map the muscles. We can open the mandible, for example, from 0 to 40 degrees of gapes. And we can measure the amount of strain, like the amount of how much stretch from the resting position of this muscle is going to have. For example, for the masseter and for the temporalis. And here is color-coded, so you can see in blue it's going to be the most posterior fibers, and in yellow it's going to be the most anterior fibers. And as you increase gape angle, both muscles are going to stretch, which is expected. And the most posterior fibers are going to stretch less than the most anterior fibers, which is also pretty animal we're looking at. So for example, we can plot this in another way. We can stretch the muscle, and now we're color-code the muscle depending on how much strain you have here. So for example, like the most anterior fibers are going to be more, they're going to be like more warm color, so it's like stretching more, and blue is going to be values that they're like not much stretch. And here you can see, but for example, like for prosimians and New World monkeys and Old World monkeys, there is big variations in how this muscle can like respond to the same stimulus. Just opening your mouth, like I don't know, like imagine like in this case 40 degrees. Prosimians tend to be like the temporalis and the masseter. They tend to stretch quite a bit. The amount of strain received on this muscle can to be much higher than you see, for example, like in macaques on baboons, or like on the capuchin monkeys that you will see around. So this is just one example. If we put this in like a more phylogenetic perspective, we can see that in the same plot, we can see how much strain within in the same plot from 0 to 40 degrees. And here you can see that overall, the masseter stretch a lot more than you will see in the temporalis, where the anterior fiber is going to stretch more than the posterior. But specifically, is this group right here is the prosimians that there is the highest level of strain. And also you can see here when you just look at the mean values, kind of like the anterior part segments of the masseter, there is a huge variation with there is from new Old World monkeys to New World monkeys to the prosimian, there is like a clade-specific changes. So there is something about the morphology of the prosimians that they make them very susceptible to changes in the effect of gape on muscle strain. So one explanation for this could be that if you compare the morphology of these guys, they're very different from for example, from Old World monkeys. The craniums are going to be a lot more elongated. They're kind of like they have like very long snout. The mandibles are like pretty flat. Where in these cases, the mandibles tend to be a lot more robust. So one thing we can see is that if you see like the amount of strain that you can see like specifically in this group matches pretty well the position of the occlusal plane with respect to the jaw joint. So here we are plotting also the amount of how far this plane is from that joint. So if you are very like almost at the same level, you're going to have like a very cold colors. And if you are, for example, like this gorilla right here, which the occlusal plane is very far from the joint, you're going to have very light colors. Prosimians, like their occlusal plane is almost at the level of the joint. So why could this be important? Because for strains, the amount of strain is like the percentage of change from the resting position. So for example, like if you start with a very small muscle and you just stretch it a little bit just because you're short, you're going to be very sensitive to the percentage of change. But if you have like a very large muscle, for example, like if your muscle of the masseter is going to be kind of like all the way up here, and the angle and the attachment of the cranium is going to be here very close to the jaw joint, that muscle overall is going to start with a much larger total length. So the amount of like the sensitivity to changes in length are going to be maybe less important for these guys than for this. Also, you can see like the general morphology of the mandible changes. Here you have like a very prominent, like this protuberance on the back of the mandible, so you can move the position of the muscle mass, so you can actually increase the length of the muscle posteriorly, which you don't see specifically in this guy. So there is very specific, like clearly specific differences in the morphology that can affect like this, how sensitive you are to changes in strength. But this, it's a very simplistic. Actually, all of these analyses were done just by opening the mandible as a hinge joint, like the mandible is just opening at the condyle, which is a simplification of the truth. We know that when you open your mouth, the condyle moves forward. So the axis of rotation, actually, of the mandible is going to be below, and then you can see that the condyle moves forward. This also is going to have implications on the biomechanics of the system. So what we're doing here is going to create a model which is simple, and then we're going to be complicated more and more to become more realistic. So we know for humans and for all animals we have like these condylar translations, and here, for example, we have an example on a baboon. For example, if you have just a hinge rotation, you can see that this muscle is going to stretch when it opens, and that black line is going to represent the moment arm. So there is definitely a stretch, and there's a significant change in the position and the orientation of the muscle. But if there is a translation of the muscle, translation of the condyle forward, you see like the direction of the muscle now kind of like remain the same. So the mechanics of the system can change, and also you can see like probably like the strain of the muscle can vary. So in work we did with Callum Ross in his lab, we actually measured the kinematics of mastication of 3 species of primates. We have like baboons, we have capuchin monkeys, and we have macaques in the lab. We put them in front of a chair, we measured the 3D kinematics, and we evaluated where the axial rotation was. And we see like there is huge variation in the axial rotation, which is indicated in here by these lines. So all of them are going to be below; they're not at the joint. But the one thing, it doesn't really important exactly what it is, but mostly see like there is variation in the position and changes. And when you see like there is changes in the position when there is opening and closing, varies in different ways depending on the species. So that means that the movement of the mandible and how the condyle changes is going to be very species specific. But what's important for this is because we have the movement, we can create these models and we can see how the muscles are being affected by this. And here we have a very complicated plot where we apply this movement and we actually measure like the strain of this muscle with this movement. So this first trace, that was the amount of strain of, for example, like that's for the medial pterygoid, for the masseter, and for the temporalis during like minimum gape, maximum gape, and minimum gape again. So that's going to be the maximum amount of stretch that you see. So this would be like the experimental amount of muscle stretch that you see like in this animal. But then we ask the questions, what will happen if this animal were just using the mandible as a hinge joint? Will be like a theoretical example, and will be this case right here. So this will be like the observed, this will be like the expected, if it will be a hinge joint. So if we subtract both amount of strength, this will be the effect of condylar translations, which if you have above 0 means that the muscle got stretched by increasing, by starting to move the condyle forward. And if the values goes below 0 means that moving the condyle forward actually is going to reduce strain on the system. And the first thing you can see is that these blue lines for the temporalis get stretched when the condyle moves forward, while the masseter and the medial pterygoid kind of like reduce the amounts of strains, which is kind of like expected at least for those muscles. So you have like these different regimes for kind of like the masseter and the pterygoid complex, well, for the temporalis. But this is the case for these 3 specific examples. So trying to kind of like move this to a much larger context where you see like all different primates can do the same kind of like a specific difference in movement can get quite complicated. So here you have like a summary of this, where you can see like the masseter when it's just rotation, and then rotation, which is the condylar translation. There is a decrease in strain for the masseter and pterygoid, and an increase of the temporalis. So the mechanics of the system is going to be different from each of those muscles. So here is just to emphasize that it's important. It's an important product. Something that we want is to be able to reduce the amount of strains on the muscles if you want to keep it in the appropriate part of the length tension curve. So here there's some estimation, for example, where the temporalis acts and the masseter acts, where when they have like high gapes, and you can see like that the temporalis is a much narrow range that we see from the masseter. So the masseter is able to use a much wider range of the length tension curve. But for the temporalis, it's pretty narrow and it's going to be pretty high. So reducing the amount of strain will be a very important component to be able to maximize the ability of the system to create forces. All right. So, but the problem is we have this data just for these three individuals, and the strains we're measuring in this case is a strain for the whole muscle. And one of the things that we know is that the strain of the muscle is not necessarily like the strain is going to be important for the system, because the whole muscle is going to be formed by muscle fibers that they are arranged in different ways within the muscle. So one thing it's important is that when the muscle contracts, for example, if you have like a muscle in here which you have like a certain pronation angle, the muscle it's a volume that has to maintain the volume. So when you contract the muscle, that volume has to be maintained. So when you have a contraction of the muscle, like for example, if you contract the muscle this way, the volume has to move, has to expand in a specific direction. You can change the thickness of the muscle, or you can bulge out. Both cases could be accepted, but it's going to have different mechanical effects. One is going to see it's going to be significant changes in the pronation angle in either case. So these dynamic contractions can alter the shape of the muscle and the pronation angles. And the mechanical effect of this can be important. For example, like in this case, if you have a muscle that the thickness of the muscle can change and the width can be maintained constant, every time you contract that muscle fiber had to rotate, had to increase the pronation angle. And it's going to, for example, like it's going to stretch that amount. But if you maintain the pronation angle constant, the muscle cannot, if the pronation angle remains constant, the muscle has to decrease in thickness and has to expand in width. When that happens, the amount of stretch of the muscle can produce is going to be very different from this specific condition. So depending on the dynamics of the system that we use, you can see that the amount of whole muscle contraction that you can see, it will be very different in either conditions. So the one thing we can say for this is that the whole muscle strain in this, like we can also talk about the muscle tendon unit, is not necessarily the same as the muscle fiber strain. They can be uncoupled. And the main thing about this is that, for example, like if you can create these conditions, so we can create a lot of muscle contractions without much muscle fiber contraction, you can actually increase the amount of, you can reduce the strain on the system significantly. And this is some data that Myra is going to be presenting tomorrow. We have experimental data on this, and just going to some preview that we have like in capuchin monkeys. And the one thing, there is a lot of data here, but here you can see like she's measuring some changes in muscle fiber from minimum gape, and you can see that you can actually measure this data, and we can test which kind of conditions you can have in the system. But what is important about this, if we can measure this, we can actually also model the effect of this into these virtual models. So we can predict, for example, what will happen in terms of the muscle strains if we can assume they're going to have like different conditions. So one of the things that we know that, for example, like the bulging condition is very important about how the system is going to react. We can have a constant penetration angle. You can maintain the thickness of the muscle constant, or we can allow the muscle to bulge in and out like freely. And we can see, for example, what will be the effect of fiber strength at, in this case, I think it's 30-degree gape. And again, if you have like high values, that means that there is a huge amount of fiber strain, which is not good. We want to keep those values low. So for example, like we're starting with a pination angle of 5 degrees, and if we change the bulging conditions from constant to variable thickness, you can see there it's not very clear, but there is a small reduction on these values, but they are pretty similar. But if we start with a pination angle much higher, like for example, like 25 degrees on the muscle, and we change these bulging conditions, the amount of reduction in the system can be quite significant, specifically for the temporalis. So you can see just by allow from constant penetration angle to variable thickness, the amount of strain in the system can be reduced quite a bit. So this can be one system that can be used to maintain also the reduction of the muscle strain. So this will be like the base case scenario. But you will see, but as we'll see, and Anja will talk about this, it's not easy just to like increase penetration angles and allow bulging of the muscle, because increasing penetration angle also usually means that we need to create more muscle. There are morphological constraints to the system. But at least this is like a theoretical experiment to be able to see how can we vary all of these different components to explore the biomechanics of the system. So also some work that in particular like Andrea has done throughout the years is that the muscles are not constant throughout. There is regional variations from anteroposterior, like between muscle. For example, the temporalis is not the same as the masseter. The posterior parts might not necessarily be the same as anterior portions. All of the models that we've been using now until this moment have been completely homogeneous. So like for example, like the whole temporalis had the same penetration angle, the same fiber length. But we can also play with this and make changes, regional changes in the muscle. So for example, we can change the variable length of the muscle from posterior to anterior. So in this case, we allow the fiber length on the back of the posterior portion of the muscle to be shorter than the anterior fibers. We can also allow variation in the penetration angle, so where the penetration angles in the back will be like less pinnated than the ones on the front, or we can now allow both. So like from posterior to anterior, these fibers in the back are short and less pinnated, and the fibers in the front are kind of like long and more pinnated. So we can see, for example, what will be the effect on this. And here we have a measure of, this is not strain, but it will be like the bite performance. So it's like using kind of like this length tension curve, where this strain and the position of the moments of these muscles. So in this case, higher values, they will be better. The warmer they are, the better this muscle will be at producing bite performance. And then you can see the anterior fibers are the most efficient muscles to be able to produce that, which makes sense. But as you open your mouth, like you can see like increased gapes, the performance of the system is going to reduce, which is expected. But what is interesting is that here, if you compare with, for example, like variable length to this one, you can vary length and angle itself. Now you can see slightly warmer colors in the front. And also here you can see like the same diagram. You can see like these changes like when you can see variation in angle is going to be in red, and then in black is going to be the line of, you can actually vary both. In this particular case, you can see, in particular, at large capes, there can be some kind of like beneficial effects of having this variation. Is this variation will be important or not? It's kind of like it's debatable, and this thing will be just for this particular case where you have for this capuchin. But we can do the same for all of the species. But things is just getting more complicated because now we have variation within the muscle, regional variation, when you can have changes in muscle length, pronation angles for just one particular individual. We can have all these three values for just one in particular individual. So trying to put back this into kind of like the phylogeny, when we're trying to see how these regional variations in kind of like in morphology, trying to map to the morphology, kind of like to the phylogenies or like the diversity that we see here. And now in particular considering that also each of these individuals has, for example, like dietary requirements that they're going to be different. There is an extra component, for example, like how much phylogeny matters, how much, for example, like behavior and kind of like and diet. It's kind of like it's important to modulate this component. This solution can be multiple. There can be multiple combinations that they can be matched to kind of like to for example dietary requirements within different parts of the phylogeny. So the system can get quite complicated, but just by exploring the kind of like the world of possibility, by just varying these parameters in the computer can be quite powerful. But of course, maybe none of these conditions are possible. The one thing we need to do is like we can explore this possibility, but then we need experimental data to be able to see what are the constraints of the system, where it is like this world of possibilities are possible. So to be able to explore the bioperformance performance can be complex. So we know that bioperformance can be affected by physiology, morphology, and then we see like muscle dynamics, there is regional variation, there is multiple integrating components kind of like modifying each other. So trying to kind of like tackle all of these, it can be quite daunting. Modeling can be a quite powerful way to explore this, but there is so much variation that we can create all the models that we want, but maybe they're not going to be realistic. So the one thing I want to emphasize here, and some of the stuff are going to be presented later in the conference, is that experimental data is essential to ground this data, to see which all of these possibilities are realistic, why, for example, certain conditions are not possible and some other ones are. So experimental data in terms of like analyzing the morphology, kind of like the actual variations in muscle morphology, the muscle dynamics that now we'll be able to explore. Well, with new technology in general physiology affected by performance is going to be essential. But trying to also put this into phylogenetic and kind of like behavioral and ecological perspective, I think also will be very useful. It is a long, there is a lot of work yet to be done. We are just starting to be kind of like doing this, but I think we're in a good place. And now the collaboration that we see between kind of like the advancement on technology and the virtual world with experimental data, I think will give us a lot of insight of the system. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, obrigado. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, just let me know.
So thank you, Pepe. It was great. So you had a slide up where you looked at the effect of different pronation angles. One, you looked at a 5-degree pronation and a 25-degree pronation. Yeah, this one here. What's the maximum amount of pronation that you see in a muscle and the minimum in the feeding system, roughly? I mean, I suppose I could ask Andrea, but seeing as you're standing up, I thought I'd ask you.
I think, yeah, the largest I've seen in I haven't done exhaustive research, but I remember from the paper, I think it's like 17 degrees, something like that. No, I'm not sure. 17? Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew.
Just give you the. Are you asking primates, non-primates? Primates. Static, with the jaws closed, 25 degrees. Masseter. Plus or minus. You can't go that much higher. If you go, right, if you go to 30 degrees maybe, there's error in those measurements. If you go much beyond that, your force is going to drop precipitously. So, yeah, 25 is a highly pennate fibred muscle.
Yeah, which is interesting because one of the things is like, at least from this perspective, having a high penetration angle, it will be great for gearing, for having this uncoupling. But yes, it's hard to have it. And the majority of the muscle run between like 5 degrees, which in some cases might not be that important for this. So it's like, yeah, why some muscles you will have that amount of penetration angle? Is that because you're going to release strain or generate force? Yeah, it's one of these. Like, what are the performance metric in this case? What you want to optimize in this case might be different. One of the cases are the individuals that have are they for example like hard object feedings that you require large gapes or not? So the answer for this, yeah, I guess it's complicated.
Just a curiosity. In your first slides, when you're showing the muscle strain, I was curious to, perhaps you have shown, but I couldn't see because the names were too small. Indrids have some particular characteristics among prosimians, like they don't have one premolar.
This one?
The one with the names. Actually, my curiosity is, yeah, perhaps this one, or maybe the other ones with the colors, with the strings.
Yeah, I think strings was. I think this one.
No, you have the phylogenetic tree with the names. Perhaps one before that.
Yeah, and I don't have one with the names at least.
Are you sure?
I think.
I thought I haven't seen that, but it's okay. I just want to know if among prosimians, the indrids behave differently.
The individuals?
Yeah, the indrid.
Oh.
Like Propithecus, and I don't know if you have Avai.
That I do not remember like the specific. Yeah, I haven't evaluated like the individual specific effects, just mostly as a group. So yeah, that's a good question, but I do not know. One of these problems too is that, like right now, we in particular for this we make a lot of assumptions for how the system is working. Even when we model, for example, like there is translations, we don't know, for example, like if the translation that we have seen experimentally, we have seen it in macaques and baboons and capuchins, and maybe a little bit in humans. But for example, like I don't know if that extends also to prosimians, if they behave more like as a hinge, or if they have like the same kind of translations. We are assuming in this case that there is the same, at least that's how I'm using, but it's like a big assumption. The other thing it might be interesting too is that in general, I don't know if as a like to model condylar translations, like the condyle also is going to follow the path of the articular eminence. And for example, what I do is not just moving the condyle forward a certain amount, but also like allow to follow the path. And for example, here is an example of condylar translations of different individuals. so that will be at occlusion, and here in yellow will be at 40 degrees. So they're passing very clearly, they follow the articular eminence. But the eminence vary drastically between the species. And for example, like these prosimians, I think they tend to have like not articular eminence kind of forward, but it's like very slanted upwards, which also might be an effect to reducing the amount of strain, because if you have articular eminence, actually should increase the strain and then decrease it. But here, it might. But for example, like, yeah, I don't know if this translation here is actually real. Maybe the animals, they translate only until here and not all the way there. Maybe they translate even a little bit more. So there is a lot of variability in the system that we can. The only way to know it would be to actually go and measure that. It would be great to be able to get, to be able to measure some prosimians, but I don't have that possibility at the moment. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Do you think the environment can affect these results? Do you think the environment conditions can affect these results? For example, in wild distribution species, living in different environments. What do you think about that?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Like indirectly, mostly probably to food availability. So if you have, like, I guess, like the first slide where yeah, I think like the most important effect, like for example, like if there is like different food availability, like the behaviors, like the feeding behaviors are going to fix it. Like you're chewing leaves, you might not necessarily have to use your premolars as much as you will have like if you have like you're looking like for nuts where you're trying to maximize the amount of torque, but also you require that I don't know, like having like much larger gape behaviors. So in that case, it definitely will affect by modifying the behavior, you'll affect the mechanics. And this is something like, unfortunately, yeah, it's not possible to model, but you can constrain it like within how much, for example, like a range of possibility of gapes that can be used can be varied depending, for example, like for season. But also, again, that requires ecological data that sometimes in some cases it's available, but for the most part we're just wild cases that we can use. But to understanding the not only like the for example like the muscle mechanics of the system, but for example like the effect on the strain regimes, you will see like depending of like these different behaviors are going to be very important to see like how much, for example, how much stress the system are going to be applied. They're going to be very important more than, for example, like where the animals are eating itself. If you put in your food, the mass, using your molars or using your premolars or using your incisor, that's going to have an important effect. So imagine that will be the most important environmental effect on the mechanics.
Thank you.
Make it short.
You made me think a lot. Can you bring up the slide with when you had the levels of the tooth row relative to the condyle? Was the most interesting slide. You had the phylogeny and then you had the different levels of the tooth row relative to the condyle. This one here. I think that was the one that you were... That's the one.
Ah.
Too small.
The names are too small?
Yeah.
You want to see injury? I don't... He has Propithecus.
Yeah, they're green, right?
Oh, they're green, exactly.
That answers my question.
Okay.
So, so when I look at this, we see that the strepsirrhines, the tooth row is at the level of the condyle, and the effect of that on their ability to generate force is compromised, right?
It's not necessary, but I guess it could be more susceptible to strain.
Right. So, if they're not, they're more susceptible to muscle strain.
Yeah.
As they open their mouths, muscles, there could be greater muscle strain. It will
Right.
affect their ability to generate force more.
Right.
There, why do you think strepsirrhines have that design? Is it? I mean, there are some strepsirrhines that aren't like that. I think the injury have got quite a deep angle, right, and they can have more larger masseter muscles. But why are there these clade effects? That's what I want to know. Can you tell me why there are these clade effects? Andrew is getting twitchy. I'm going to pass.
The why?
Why? Why do strepsirrhines have that design?
I don't know. But one other thing, for example, like I think like what you do, you have like a compensation, but just having that mandibular angle too. It's like the projections, and I think this might be actually the primitive condition because I think like, you see this also in other mammals. So maybe the question is not why these guys are like that, why like these guys are like this, and why would you lose that? But it's still, I don't know why.
Okay, thank you.
Pepe, you talk about strain in the fiber lengths.
Mm-hmm.
But did you consider the tendons? Because the muscles have different tendons, in special the temporalis.
Yes. Thanks.
I think Andrea will talk about that. I don't know.
Yes, that's a very good point because one of the things is like that's whole muscle length. So one of the ways that you can unlink like the total muscle length from fiber length is just by using like the changes in penetration angle, but also by having a compliant tendon. Also, you have because a lot of the strain can be taken by the tendon. So I think definitely it will be kind of like muscle specific. Maybe the temporalis will be. If still like that, because I had like match, I think the discrete tendon in the coronary process might be more compliant that you see in the masseter. The masseter, for example, they have like a lot more internal architecture, which I think also is very interesting in terms of like the way the system is designed because for having an effective an effective effect of like rotation angles. It's important that actually like the fiber units are short. So I guess if you have like internal tendon, actually it allows to shorten in the fibers. Yeah. But it has to be considered. And for us, it's in these cases we're assuming that there is no tendon, and this is a very simple system. But one other thing, for example, like hopefully Myra can do is like you can actually measure the muscle fiber lengths, but also you can measure the whole unit, so you can see what will be the effect of the tendon in that case. It has to be considered.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pepe. Thank you for coming. Now it's a coffee time. Okay. Uma pausa para o café. Em 15 minutos nós retornamos. 15 minutes.